Hello and welcome to the Why the Mountains podcast with me, your host, Stephen Farley. My broadband is still knocked out by Storm Dara. I have no idea when it may be reconnected, but we struggle on. This is the second part of our interview with Jason Black, mountaineer and mountain guide from Dunfanaghy in County Donegal. If you missed the first part of the interview, I suggest you listen to that one first. In this episode, Jason takes us with him on his journey to the highest peaks in the world, the successes and failures and the heartache that is part of life at high altitude. However, we begin by Jason taking a step back and sharing a story from his childhood that had a profound effect on him and continues to have an effect on his life. It is a tough story for Jason to tell and tough to listen to, but essential to understanding what shaped the man and the adversity he has faced to achieve his dreams. I try not to interrupt because the story is so compelling. Some of the following content may be difficult for some listeners. I hope you enjoy this episode.
I'd like to go back a step because there's a chapter in my life that is pretty black. I'd gone to a national school, a young country school here in Donegal, and it was beautiful. I didn't have a school uniform. I think there was only about 13 in the class. It was in the countryside. You had to be dropped to school by your parents, and my dad was a motor mechanic, and he had an old Sherpa van. And he dropped us to school every day. And I had a beautiful early national school life up to the age of 13, great friends. And then I was ready to go to secondary school, and I was the oldest of the house. And I'll never forget the curiosity that day, of going to secondary school. I was ready for the next chapter in my schooling adventure. Got my first uniform, got my first bag, my first adventure in a school bus. Going into Letterkenny, but unfortunately for me, I fell victim to a very violent bully who absolutely destroyed me for 6 years. I probably was green behind the ears because I was this country boy and I stood out like a sore thumb. Now, this is a young boy who was very passionate about nature. Football and all those things really didn't fall into my remit, and I probably did behave and act pretty strange. I was outside with nature and not in the schoolyard with the football, and I wasn't trying to fit in because I was just being Jason. And I probably looked a bit like I probably looked like the square peg, as I said. So 6 years, of a barbaric experience, every day going through the school gates for 6 years. It was mental torture, physical bullying, mental bullying, and emotional bullying. And it was a tough time because my mum and dad were working very hard at home. My mum was a hard-working housewife. My daddy was a very hard-working motor mechanic at the side of the house. And, I was the oldest of four. We didn't have much money. There wasn't much money growing up in Donegal back then. And I just didn't want to bring that hardship home. I could see how they were working hard and trying to keep life going, And I decided to absorb it all. I decided to bottle it up inside and tell nobody, and it's probably my biggest regret today. I do a lot of talks in schools today, and I encourage young people and everybody that I meet in life, even if it's in a marriage or in a work environment, just to have the courage to put your hand up and say, look, I'm struggling here, I'm being bullied, or I'm not doing well and I need help. Because I didn't have the courage to do that. So look, leaving school at 17, going out the school gates, I'd lost an education. I didn't want to be there.
As Jason says, it is one of his biggest regrets not speaking to someone when all of this was going on. I don't know if there are any young people listening to this podcast, but if there are, and you recognise your story and what Jason is saying, please do consider speaking to someone you trust about what is going on and seek help. And remember, bullying is not your fault. Jigsaw.ie is one place to go to seek help. What Jason moves on to now is quite a difficult listen, but so powerful as well.
My saving grace, Steve, was that I had sport and scouting in my life, because whenever I would leave every single day and go out the school gates to go home, I would throw the bag in the corner, because that bag represented the bully to me, and school just represent bully. It didn't represent education. And for me then, I just ran. I was just in the mountains running, all day long on my bike, crying, escaping, but the cry wasn't coming out. The cry was inside, So my saving grace and my exploration, my waiting room for psychology was nature, was just the great outdoors. It got to a point where it was really bad. I wanted to kill myself. I tried to commit suicide. It was very black for me. I couldn't see out the bully had done so much internal damage. I had no confidence in myself. And and then society became the next bully, because what I didn't see coming was, because I didn't have the results of the A, B's, and C's. I was judged by a piece of paper, so I couldn't get a job. So I spent, quite a few years kind of trying to get into anywhere. I had a breakthrough. I got into Dunnes Stores to pack the shelves, and I was the best packer of shelves you ever met in Dunnes Stores, because I had something to prove. And I think that kind of continued in my mountaineering life. As I said to you, that road for me was very black at the time. I was definitely dealing with a very, young mental depression. I didn't know what it was, because we didn't have the support systems in place today, like Jigsaw and Foreiga and these things that are to catch people today, and even the confidence to speak about it today with you and others that are listening. You didn't do that in the late 80s. It wasn't a done thing. And for me, I'm just so privileged. When I talk about my love for nature, it's not because I want to be this holistic, outdoor lover. It's not. My love for nature is because it kept me here on the planet. When I did try to kill myself that day, I bought the rope and I tried to hang myself. And it's not something I'm very proud about speaking about, but I am privileged that nature kept me, because I went for a walk, and it was that walk that grounded me, that conversation that caught me, that space that allowed me to cry and vent, and it didn't judge me, because I think that's what's precious for me about nature. It's not the summits that I ever got to. It's not the accolades of standing on Everest or K2 or Aconcagua or any of these mountains that I've been on. It's the fact that I just have the space to breathe, and nature just gives us that space in a very busy world that's full of, it's full of expectations, and it's full of drama, and it's full of emails and conversations and noise and pollution of money and the battles to stay in life and to stay with the Joneses and the rat race of keeping up. Nature just lets you breathe. And for me, that's truly what my adventure life's about. It's been just about, I'll never forget that day. To the day I die, I'll never forget that feeling of not killing myself, of just being able to see a little bit further than the black cloud that day.
It's a privilege to listen to Jason speak about this part of his life. Jason must have amazing courage to tackle the summits he has been on, but the ability to speak out about these experiences from his childhood, a really dark time in his life, as he says himself, demonstrates immense bravery and determination. It's interesting how he phrases his love of nature, that nature lets you breathe. One part of what he said struck me, that he was looking at society as a bully also. I didn't fully understand this point, but Jason elaborates on it, as well as answering my very clunky at best question about why he didn't reach out for help.
I made a decision not to. Again, I'm not very proud of that. I don't blame the teachers, because I hid it. I hid it so well. I didn't want to bring it home. I just kept it to myself. And it was really hard. I mean, really, really hard. Just to stay alive and to stay going, to stay motivated. And dealing with a bully for 6 years was hard, I have to say, but dealing with society was even harder. I'd never seen society as a bully coming. Being judged for a lack of education was criminal. Just because I didn't have the A's, the B's, and the C's, I was judged for all the E's and D's. And I remember, and I have a very vivid feeling and memory of applying for jobs on a continuous basis and getting called for an interview, but quite quickly they would look at the piece of paper, and I knew that I was going no further. I couldn't get off my knees, and I kept screaming internally to look at me, don't look at the piece of paper, look at me in the white of the eye, look at what I can do. You know, ask me the questions, give me a chance, you know, give me the brush, give me the chance, just give me a chance. But nobody would, you know, and I know that sounds dramatic, but that's what it was. That's what it was like. I was very judged by society. And then, you know, because you don't have the money, you know, you're not wearing the cool clothes. You weren't wearing the, you know, and I was happier with Mother Nature than I was with life. You know, because I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel judged in any manner. And, you know, I still struggle, if I'm being very honest with you today. This is why I'm still a mountaineer. I'm not pursuing the summits. I'm not chasing. The summit isn't my goal. It's the feeling of nature. It's the freedom of exploration. It's to be able to dance with nature in a non-intrusive manner, that I don't have to conform, that I don't have to wear, say, certain clothes. I don't have to talk a certain way. I don't have to act a certain way. It's just like, it's there and it's your choice and it's beautiful. And that's my mountaineering life. And it's as strong inside me today as it was back then.
Again, through this whole section of the interview, I was humbled by what Jason was prepared to share with me. And to be honest, I didn't feel I had the competency as an interviewer to remain aware of how deep this part of the story was, and talk to Jason about it with enough care and sensitivity. When I'm sitting here writing the episode and listening back to Jason, there are questions I wish I had asked, and perhaps part of the story has been missed. And if he ever writes a book, I will be first in line to buy it. Jason had to deal with much more heartache to come in his life, and he went on to speak a little bit about his family and the impact his mountaineering and Everest had on them.
My family were very supportive. My dad had just lost I lost my mum at 17 years of age, just as I was coming out the school gates, which didn't help things, because my mum in my home was the glue. She was everything to me. And my dad was really struggling with losing his partner and his wife. And unfortunately, my brother had died in a motorbike accident a few years later. And I could see the pain my dad was going through. And here his next son was going off to climb a mountain that was full of risk. And taking it on the way I was taking it on was even loaded more so. But he was my champion. My dad gave me his blessing. He knew I was a very driven individual. My dad understood the power of sport. You know, he had been a judo instructor in his earlier life, and he had introduced me to judo as a young boy, and I got a lot of discipline through judo. My dad took me to judo, and, you know, I went on to be a black belt in judo, and, you know, I was even the, you know, which is ironic, you know, I was a very proficient fighter in judo whenever the bullying was happening, and yet I still didn't use the judo against the bully, because I didn't have the confidence. The bully had dismantled me through confidence. It's hard to explain, but when your confidence is on the floor, you're so stripped bare. And my home, you know, I had met Sharon at this stage, my wife, and my partner, and I got her blessing as well. And yeah, I didn't look too deep into it. I was just so focused on my journey. And my journey then was the summit, but I didn't really realize what was just about to happen to me. Yeah, my kids were born. They were very, very young, and but I was so focused on my journey that I didn't see that as an emotional attachment. Even though I had a massive emotional attachment to my county and my home, I've never ever been left to the airport by any family member. I've always left by the local CIE bus. I just find it very difficult to say goodbye. So I find I do all my crying from the from the bus station in Letterkenny to the port bridge. And the minute I cross the port bridge, I stop my tears and I focus on what I've got to do. And I have this very clear cutting off an umbilical cord from my life here, to engage with my life as a mountaineer. And they do run completely parallel to each other, but they're in two completely different universes. I have a life that I live here in this world, which I still struggle with. And I have a life within mountaineering that I absolutely love. And the best version of me, I believe, doesn't exist in this world. But the best version of me exists in the other world. And that's hard for some people to hear.
I wanted to speak more to Jason about all of this, but the focus of the podcast was his experiences of Everest, so we started to focus a bit more on that. Though the experiences Jason had growing up would accompany him up the hill and would take a large toll on him. There was no separating Jason's attempt on Everest and the devastation he had gone through, both with the bully, the loss of his mum, and the tragic loss of his brother. I began by asking Jason a little bit about how he approached the climb on the north side of Everest, who he was with, and did he go with a group or a company?
No, I'm not part of a commercial setup at all. I'm in there. Nima Gumbu is with me. He's trying to help me in there. And then we start the journey, just the two of us. And yeah, I remember going up into high camp, advanced base camp at the base of the head wall. Base camp is probably 5,000 meters. Advanced base camp is 6,002. Setting up camp in there, very, very primitive, very primitive. We got some yak. There was a local yak farmer. We hired the yak farmer to take in 2 yaks and to carry some supplies up. We carried the rest of it up ourselves. Set up a very primitive base camp in there. And we'd gone through the acclimatization process of, climbing high, sleeping low, trying to get comfortable with altitude, and then going up onto the head wall, which leads to the summit of Mount Everest. Up onto the head wall, turn left and go up onto the summit ridge. And again, crampon point was just at the base of it. That's where I left my gear, my ice axe, my crampons. I was suffering with altitude. I was having the effects of it. I didn't even know what Diamox was back then. I didn't use Diamox. I had no idea what Diamox was. But we'd gone through loads and loads of rotations in there to get acclimatized. I remember one day in particular, I was climbing on my own. I was climbing up to 7,700 meters on my own, doing an acclimatization rotation. I was taking gear up. I had already set up my tent at the top of the head wall, a yellow and white north face tent, and I had fixed the line in on the head wall, and I was climbing with a Jumar up to that camp, and I had a breakdown. I didn't see it coming. I had all the bullying and the death of my mum and the death of my brother came back. I was very confused and very annoyed and very angry. I think what had happened to me was I had, in this modern society today, I was living a busy life, a young man. I had buried the effects of the bully. I had pretended that I was okay. I had buried the effects of my mum's death and the impact of my brother passing. And I had thrown myself into mountaineering and sport and the outdoor life as a form of escape. And I was running away from the horrors of what was actually happening inside. And I think the isolation of Everest as a mountain, because I was there for 2 months, it took me 2 months to climb it because of the primitive way I went about it, and the support system was very low and slow. But the isolation of being in there and not having the effects of telephone calls and the pollution of life, the pollution of noise of life. What happened was that the noise inside my mind was so loud that I couldn't hear it in this world, and unfortunately it raised its ugly head in there because the silence was deafening. And all the effects of bullying and depression and suicide had all come flooding back, and it was very powerful, and it actually hijacked me, and it paralyzed me as a person. And I unfortunately had to go through nearly a week of mourning my mum, my brother, the bully. I'll never forget the cries and the pain. Even today, I can feel it as I'm talking to you. Of having to deal with the effects of it, and and today when I look back and I think about it, nature was so kind. It gave me the peace. It gave me the space to make peace with it because I did. I had no choice. I had to face the elephant in the room. I had suppressed all the feelings and the noises. I'd been running away from it, but now I had no choice but to deal with it. And, I was so angry because here was me on the side of Everest, crying like a child, uh, when I'm trying to be this super strong athlete on the greatest mountain on the planet. And I'm reduced to tears every day, and I'm just having to battle through. And that's what it was like. That was my Everest. I was climbing a bigger Everest than I could ever imagine, and I was having to make peace with my past, and it was bloody hard. It was really really hard. So when I did make peace with it, I was able to get on with the job of climbing.
It turns out Everest was not the only mountain Jason was trying to climb. This climb was about much more than just a summit, though he still had to go through the same experience as everyone else: acclimatizing, putting in camps, rotations, ladders, and the people who had tread these slopes before him.
Yeah, like once I got myself up into camp one, camp two, got myself acclimatized, got my tent set up, um, get the route put in. There was no Sherpa team putting in a route here. Like we were carrying the rope and we were putting in the route ourselves. I'd never been to the first step, second step. I'm learning how to navigate this. I'm thinking about George Mallory and Sandy Irvine and that primitive time and back then, long before the Everest summit was achieved, and all this was rushing through my head. I'd known about their story, and that's a fact. I just done a documentary on George Mallory and Sandy Irvine just a couple of months ago there, which hopefully will be coming out soon. Um, and it was just interesting, to be up in Mushroom Rock and all these iconic features on that side of Everest, that you've heard about and read about, and there I'm cutting my teeth in them, on my own, trying to go up the first step and second step on this very primitive little ladder that's there from earlier expeditions, trying to pull in all that craft and skill that I learned in Chamonix and in Scotland and in the Cognac Valley in Switzerland, and all that craft just to get me through these very, very challenging features, all at altitude, all at a time where oxygen levels are low, and just the will to survive is difficult, and it's cold and you're isolated and you're hungry and you're trying to navigate your way on the side of Everest, and then summit night. Then I'm there. I'll never forget getting. The Chinese were going to the summit. They were pushing to get to the summit on the 18th of May. And there's this race every year to see who can get to the summit first from the Nepalese side or the Chinese side. And the weather was atrocious. I'll never forget it. The winds were blowing maybe about 100 miles an hour. My tent was being destroyed. I actually done a small video because I actually thought I was going to be killed because I didn't think I was going to survive it. My tent, all the poles in my tent were now collapsed. The tent's down on top of me, but the zip door of my tent is broken, and I'm holding on to it with my hand. And it's Baltic. I mean, the snow's coming into the tent, and it's freaking Baltic. I mean, it is really cold. I've got my high altitude gear on me, and I looked outside my door, and I could hear the Chinese going past. I could hear the clinking of the ice axes, and I'll never forget it. And then I got out to go to the summit I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. I come out and I met the Chinese team coming back as I left high camp to start our camp 4 to start my push. Um, I never forget it. There was the Chinese were on the way back. Some had died. Quite a lot of them were snow blinded. A lot of them were definitely heading for amputation. They had lost their gloves in the storm, and you could see that they were very badly damaged, and they were trying to get down. And I'll never forget myself and a few other climbers trying to help them get back down again. Um, So at this stage, there's about 4 or 5 other climbers that we had kind of all come together from other expeditions that were now pushing to go to the summit. And unfortunately, there's still another um, couple of twists in the story. Another Sherpa that I've become very friendly with called Namgil. Is climbing with a guy called Billy, a British climber. Namgil had died from high altitude sickness, cerebral edema. He was very good to me earlier on in the expedition. He had seen that I was vulnerable. I'll never forget it. He spotted that I was mentally vulnerable earlier on, and he brought me in and made me a pizza. Believe it or not, he was able to. I never forget this guy making a pizza in base camp. To this day, I still have a head scratching when I think about it. And he was so kind. And Namgil was involved in cutting down the ropes and on the south side. Early on, he approached the Nepalese government and asked them to give some funding, and he went up with 2 other Sherpas, and he was a troll. He was really annoyed about the way the mountain was being treated, and he was very committed to that space about with nature and the protection of Everest. So I love that. And that's ultimately why he was climbing on the far side of the mountain as well. So he unfortunately died that day. I'll never forget when I came to him. I opened his hands up. I turned him into the sun. I put the goggles over his eyes, and I put the oxygen bottle in behind his head. And I said, "In our Father," and I left him there that day and went on to the summit. And when I got to the summit, I know I'm a bit fast tracking here. When I got to the summit, it was just the size of it's only 4 square meters up there. When I got there, I had a realization, Steve, that I wasn't standing on the summit of Mount Everest. I was standing on the summit of my life. And I had overcome the battle of suicide, the battle of the bully, the battle of losing Mammy and Billy, my brother, the battle of society and the judgment attached to being different. And that's what my summit was. My summit wasn't to stand on the summit of the greatest mountain or the highest place on the planet, even though that in itself was amazing. The feeling that I had was that I had survived. I had survived them all, and it was only by the mercy of nature that I got this opportunity. And then the realization that I was on the summit of the world was huge. The pride that came into me was amazing. The pride of my mum and dad, the pride of myself. And I hadn't had that pride ever. I never ever felt proud about me because the bully had battered that out of me. But the pride of who I was and what I stood for, and the confidence to keep pushing through was huge. The pride of not hanging myself that day, and just having the courage to keep going and keep going and keep going whenever the clouds were black and grey and I couldn't see out. The pride of my granny and granda, and the pride of being Irish, and being Donegal. And I was now the first Donegal man to stand on the summit. Nobody had ever done it before, and I pulled the flag out of my bag. And that sense that it'll still with me to this day. That sense of pride of growing up in Donegal, and and honouring Morris and Daisy, my leaders, and honouring the people that had given me every leg up, and the guides that give me those hours, the people that paid for those airplane flights, the people that brought me into their homes and fed me, the Sherpas that give me a bed to lie in. It was all for them. It wasn't just about me. It was about everybody, and I was just so privileged. I stood there, I had no oxygen on. I could see the full circumference of the earth, 360 degrees. It had this beautiful, dirty brown rainbow right around the circumference of the earth, which was obviously, today looking back, it was gravity holding the dust particles around the circumference of the earth, and it was just magical. I could see the full 360, and it was just beautiful. It was just gorgeous. And the British team were coming up from the far side. I was there on my own 7 o'clock in the morning. There was an incident happened just before the summit. Sherpas had to turn back and help, and I stood there on my own. I got there on my own, and I got the photograph taken by the British team that were coming up from the south side. It was Red Nose Day in 2013. They were doing a live broadcast from just below the summit. And if you go on to BBC Live Red Nose Day 2013, you'll see somebody standing on the summit, sitting on the summit on their own, and that's me. And one of the Sherpas that was guiding that day set the world record 21 times on top, and Cami. And as he come to the summit, it was me that welcomed him to the summit as a world champion, and it was him that took my photograph. And it was so surreal. It was just so surreal. The whole journey, the battle, and to get there, the battle, to survive the battle, the purpose. I now knew what my why was. I now know today what my big why is in mountaineering. It's not the summit. It's not, I don't care about the summit. It's not, the summit for me is having the courage to keep pushing, having the courage to believe, having the courage to be myself in a world that's trying to make me different. And I think that's very powerful, and that's my message today. It isn't about, yes, we need goals, dreams, and aspirations. Yes, we need to believe in ourselves. Yes, we need to train hard, and yes, we need to focus and have purpose. But I think deep down, it's about trying to be yourself in a world that's trying to make you something different, and trying to fit and conform in a box that that is made up of a fancy car and a fancy house and fancy clothes, and you have to subscribe to be that. And if you're not, you're odd and different. Well, I'm proud to be odd and different because I don't want that. And I'm encouraging everybody I meet today just to find their own box in life and find their own box in society, and just be proud of who you are, what you are, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, whether you're homosexual, whether you're rich or you're poor, whatever your background is, whatever your culture is, whatever your religion is, whatever your belief system is, just be proud of who you are, what you are, and what you stand for. And if you feel isolated because of that, then change the people that's in your box. And that's my message. And everybody should have a summit, and the summit doesn't have to be Mount Everest. I have more respect for people today that I meet that are struggling with disabilities, that can't get out of bed because of depression, that have suicidal thoughts. That these are my champions. I'm not a champion. My accolades are personal to me. They're not egotistically driven. They're not hanging on a wall to prove to people that I'm better than anybody else. I'm just Jason Black. I only ever want to be this very ordinary person from Donegal that went through a very, very difficult time in life, and that by the mercy of nature survived and has found purpose in life, and is just continuously exploring as a mountaineer. That's who I really am.
I have asked everyone I have interviewed, what was it like on Summit Day? What was it like to stand on the top of the world? But I have never heard it described as Jason does, standing on the summit of his life. Everyone overcomes adversity to achieve the lifelong dream of Everest, but for Jason, he had carried so much of what happened to him in his younger years, so much weight, that it makes achieving the summit of Everest even more remarkable. Jason, finally and quite rightly, was proud of what he achieved, the first Donegal man to stand on the summit of Everest.
I love sharing my story, because I've eventually got to a point where I can actually speak about it. There was a long, long number of years I couldn't even speak about it. I couldn't even mutter the words because I didn't know how to handle the emotions. So I drove the emotion back down inside. And it was when I spoke about it, it became real. The emotion hasn't gone away, if I'm being honest. I've just learned to live with it better, and I've learned to be able to verbalize it, because I do feel today that it is helping people. But for me, it's just my story. I don't have the magic wand. I don't know what the magic pill is. I just know that nature holds this very sacred space, and that if you give it a chance, it has the ability to heal and grow. And it is just so precious. And yet we're still hell bent in destroying it. You know, we're still hell bent destroying it. I'm only after coming back from attempting to grow the Atlantic Ocean, and yet 1,000 nautical miles in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, I was seeing plastic bottles come past me, and I'm sitting thinking, you know, and then, you know, on the next breath, I'm seeing these beautiful whales pop up and parade themselves around my boat, and I'm thinking, as human beings, what are we doing? Why are we hell bent on destroying the one thing that has the potential to heal us? And we talk about mental health issues today, and they've never become more prevalent. And yet, the one facility that's there that has the ability to heal is nature, and yet we're hell bent on destroying it.
I love talking to Jason, hearing his story and getting to know him a little, as a mountaineer and as a person. The importance of nature, the mountains, and the chance to escape into them has helped Jason cope with many challenges. But as he says himself, he tells his story so that it might help others going through similar experiences. That would be a good place to end with Jason. But the story of getting down from Everest is too good to miss, and has similar echoes as Banjo Bannon's descent, which we covered in a previous episode. Enjoy.
The story for leaving Everest is a bit surreal as well. When I came back down again, I developed sleep apnea on Everest, which was really challenging. Sleep apnea was basically I couldn't sleep at all, purely because when I went to breathe at night, I hadn't got the oxygen, and my brain or my lungs would waken me up again. So I just was getting no sleep. So I was so tortured with sleep as well. I don't know why that happened to me, but it happened to me. On the way back down again, the sleep apnea wasn't going away. And when I got back to base camp, all I wanted to do was to get home. I'll never forget coming off the summit of Everest. I was so fatigued and so broken as a human being. I sat down. I sat down on the rocks just below the summit on the way back down again. I was so exhausted, and I was having this real outer body experience. I thought it was snowing, and what I didn't realize, I'd cut my down suit on the rocks, and all the duck feathers that were in my bum was all flying out of my suit and was coming around me, and I was having this kind of like real like spiritual experience, and I thought, Jesus, like, but it was actually the feathers that was coming out of my ass. So then I got back down into high camp. The storm that had broken my tent, because the storm that year, the jet streams on Everest are traveling about 200 kilometers an hour. The jet stream that year had dropped down into the camps. So from the summit at 8848, it dropped down into about 8,000 meters. So we had to climb through a storm to get out, and then it was clean air. When I come back down again, the storm had collapsed my tent. I had no tent to go into on the way back down again, so I climbed in between two rocks and I slept at my summit camp. When I say my summit camp, it's just somewhere I pitched my tent on the side of Everest on these rocks. But I climbed in between two rocks, and it was the cold of the rocks that woke me up about 6 or 7 hours later. I was so cold from the rocks that woke me up, and then I said I need to get myself back down again. So I got back down again to high camp, come down the wall, got into high camp, got some food, was still really struggling big time, got back down to base camp, and there's two Chinese authorities, two Chinese soldiers that were in base camp, and they told me they couldn't let me leave, that they needed to give me, they needed to wait for other climbers to come down, and then they would get like a small bus or something, and then they would basically ship us out. So I was like furious at this. So anyway, we decided to leave base camp. I left all my gear behind me, and I waited for them to go to bed at night. I left every single piece of gear behind me, and I basically said it to one of the Sherpas that I was leaving, and said to Nima I was leaving, and I waited till they went to bed at night, and I walked from base camp back to Tingri at night time, and I got into Tingri and I hired a guy in a little white pan loaf Toyota Hiace van. I paid him $100 to drive me to the border. I snuck. He pulled out the foam off the back seat. I got in underneath the foam of the back seat of that bus, and we spent 3 days driving through Tibet. I could see that at each checkpoint, obviously the alarm bells had gone off in base camp, and at each checkpoint they were looking for me. and they couldn't find me. I didn't realise that the driver of the bus was high on marijuana. I could smell it then. The music was turned up high, and he was like singing away. Guy was stoned, and he drove me the whole way. I never forget. We got to the last village called Naran, and they found me in the wagon, and took us out of the wagon. And bit of an interrogation went on. I didn't really care. I was so broken and battered from Everest, I didn't care. At this stage, I'd gone through the mill, and they told me they were going to take the summit certificate off me, and they weren't going to accredit my summit. I told them I don't care. I said emotionally and physically, I knew I got there. And eventually, after an interrogation of I don't know how long, they basically put me into a jeep, took me to the border, and chucked me across the border into Nepal, where I got a small I jumped onto the public bus, and I was sitting in with all the locals in the public bus, wearing the same clothes I had come from Everest with, and I ended up in Kathmandu. I got into Kathmandu. It was the first chance that I got to ring Sharon from a phone, told her that I had survived and I was fine, and I went to the Buddha Buddha bar in Kathmandu, and I got stone drunk on 2 beers, and I had a burger. So that was my, and that was even before I had a shower. And then I went and got a shower.
A fitting way to end these 2 episodes with Jason Black. We will hear from Jason again in our episode on Ger McDonald. Jason's life story, not just the summit of Everest, is an amazing journey. He goes on to summit K2 in the same year as Noel Hanna, 10 years after Ger McDonald reached the summit, but died on the descent, coming to the aid of other climbers. As I said, we will hear more about this later. I hope you enjoyed this episode. That is us back on track now. Join us again next week for another Why the Mountains podcast episode, and do get in touch with us on whythemountainspodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. But in the meantime, stay safe and stay cool.